While our normal, mostly quiet Western society has marched on, we know in the back of our minds that conflict is happening. Out there in the world beyond our normal scale of daily life, battlefields exist. Especially in modern times, we have grown very accustomed to a constant foreign conflict. Not the big clean world wars of the past, but a messy, hazy series of battlefields instead. As our normal society grappled with machines, grappled with computers, and with the casual acceptance of technology, out on those battlefields an aggressive evolution was always taking place. A flying metal organism with computers 10 years ahead of our own was being bred for war, growing ever more advanced decade by decade. And the humans who sought to master control over that organism were being pushed further and further and further to grasp those controls of that machine to their fullest. But make no mistake, as advanced as these machines become, war is war. Even for these pairs of human and mechanical organism cleaving through the sky, death has not gone away, and this perhaps is the cost. To preserve our modern world, thousands of kilometers away, to ensure its existence, every so often a sacrifice must be offered. And true, while many ground troops may die, the sacrifice with the highest cost, and that which satisfies the forces of war and their hunger of war most, is that of the cutting, flying machine and its human partner. This is the story of that sacrifice, of that evolved human-machine bond pushed to its extreme. One of my favorite OVAs and short SF mecha series. It is funny to me, honestly, how many people would applaud the flying scenes in Yukikaze or talk about the cool jet fights, yet if you asked them to tell you what Yukikaze was about, they would basically stare at you with a blank expression. I think like many things, you have to look at stuff outside and beyond the typical worlds of our stories of anime to really understand that. And as it is vitally important, the best place to start would be just the setup of Yukikaze's world, because it's explicitly one made to be an extreme example of what I just mentioned. The simplest and most interesting factor about Yukikaze's war is how obvious what it's setting alone is telling us. While we have jet fighters and aliens, there is something integral that has been changed dramatically. You see, where a war is fought is just as integral to how a public perceives it as who is fighting and how they are doing so. In Yukikaze's war, unlike one squarely set on, say, a backdrop of New York or Tokyo, is instead set absolutely the furthest out of the way possible. In universe, ever since humanity drove the jam back through the portal they opened in Antarctica, the main battles of the war are completely divorced from the Earth, more or less. Even a conflict that was in fact extremely distanced from modern average Western life, like say the Falklands War, is still thousands of kilometers closer to our normality than Yukikaze's battles. The Falklands in South America was one of the last places reached by human migration on Earth, but no humans in the ancient past ever migrated to Antarctica. Even the Inuit and other Native Americans live near the Arctic more than its opposite. I know it seems like an odd thing to focus on to start, but it's clearly something deliberate. Chohei Kambayashi, the author of the original novels that Yukikaze was based on, was clearly doing something here. The main battles are not only not on Earth, they are only connected to Earth's most distant and sparsely populated land. As even in Blue Sub number 6, they call it the end of the world. Not a portal in Los Angeles or London, but squarely in the cold desert of snow at the bottom of ours. So, across that portal is where the bulk of our story takes place, on a planet called Fairy. Before we get to that, it's important to remember something else, something that also plays a big part. Not only is Yukikaze's war isolated in its geography, it's isolated in its chronography as well. What I mean is, once again, if you wanted to make a simple, exciting war story, one that panders to our human attention span and is nice and choppy with its acts, you make it short. You make it a few years, or perhaps even just 1 year maybe. Because here's the other sad fact. Not only do people not care about wars far away in distance, they don't care about wars that go long in the tooth. When the wars we hear about don't affect us, and and we don't see them affect our lives. Even if they are miserably destructive, we just end up ignoring them. Or maybe more cynically, we grow bored of the idea of that violence. The wars in the Middle East began with tremendous approval ratings and enthusiasm to retaliate for 9/11. But over time, after years and years, the haziness and length of that war sapped that energy, patience, and even attention to its happening from the general public. And once again, Yukikaze is using that same concept taken to its extreme. By the time of the story, we see humanity has been present on the planet Fairy for now over 3 decades. To put that in perspective, that's longer than Vietnam, or the Soviets in Afghanistan, the American deployments in the Middle East, all Balkan conflicts, or even some of these combined. A more typical appealing story would set it during the human fight to push the jam out of Antarctica, or the counterattack into Fairy across the portal. But it isn't. What is so neat about this conflict to me, just right off the bat as a very just kind of outline, is that while still being attached to our modern world, it is by default a war inherently designed to be inhuman. Not in the sense of evil, but in the sense of being as far away from the patience and interest and kind of mental geography that your average human gives a shit about. When I say to other people that Yukikaze's war is insane, or extreme, or inhuman, this is what I mean. It's a world in conflict both physically and chronologically beyond what normal people like and care about. It's a war in science fiction that reflects, sadly enough, most of our actual contemporary wars. Long, hazy, distant and monotonous, instead of pandering to us with a cool super space war based on the World War II template that we know entertains us. But that is only half of it. The other half, and the other thing that is insane about Yukikaze, is it reflects our technological advancement better than a lot of typical SF as well. You see, this is another factor about modern war and how our media grapples with it. Just as humans need a war to be fought near enough to them and short enough that they can understand what happens and why, they also need a war to feel, ironically enough, human. If you ever wonder why Star Wars tech is so limited or kneecapped, or why space dogfights typically happen even slower and closer than most World War II fights, this is it. And no, I don't mean bullshit lore reasons, I don't give a shit about that. The actual reason are simple. It's because in the age of the jet fighter, the reaction time and speed of battle has outpaced what most humans are comfortable with or prefer or enjoy. The reason we like World War I biplanes is because they are slow and personal, and even World War II dogfights are mostly trackable by a modern audience. But our modern air war has become this insane extreme. It is pilots flying inside a computer-controlled machine, telling a series of smaller machines to use their machines to sense and lock onto traces of enemy machines, then launch suicidal machines to destroy them. And this is the other insanity of modern war that Yukikaze does capture, and also one of my biggest criticisms about Ace Combat 7. For people interested in these stories, the automation of war is not really an ethical problem. The problem is, if this automation holds true, there is a childlike fear and anxiety that we will be removed from our very power fantasies as well, not just from reality, but from our fiction. Remember, most people are not even comfortable or even understand the modern state of war, or air war in general. And this is why I adore Yukikaze, because it's that taken once again even further. Yukikaze not only accepts the modern state, it once again aggravates it by 30 years. You see, ever since humanity pushed the jam, the alien invaders, back through the portal into Fairy, there has been, in essence, a non-stop arms race. This is something the first novel expands on a bit, but I think the anime still gives a good impression of it taking place. The United Nations forces on Fairy, the Fairy Air Force, flies out to do combat sorties against the jam, as we see in Episode 1. Units like the original Yukikaze, the Super Sylphide B-503, and Rei Fukai, our main character, monitor and gain battle information. That information is then recorded and processed by the Super Sylph's FCS, or Flight Control Computer. After being recorded, it's then fed into the FAF's mainframe supercomputers at their main base. And they then cook up an analysis of the jam's battle doctrine. That battle doctrine is then fed to another set of computers who design new weapons and planes, who will then cook up just that, which finally is sent to another final set of machines who will have to build it all. Basically, it's friggin' amazing. Not only is Yukikaze's story not afraid of dealing with how advanced jets are normally compared to, say, where normal people like them to be, but in addition, this war is set in a kind of insane, aggravated state of advanced technological development. And once again, beautifully, this reflects the real world. One of the biggest advances for aircraft was, ironically, computers. And not just in those that control the machines directly via fly-by-wire, but also those that design them, in being able to model their function through complex airflow and simulations. Computers revolutionized jet aircraft in every way. This is one of the main reasons that their shape changed so dramatically towards the end of the 20th century. And this is also, once again, why stories that fearmonger about technology are inherently not a great fit for jet aircraft or fighter planes. These very machines are not just super tech, they are well and a ways ahead of our normal society, just by default. They are really things being pushed to the limit. Trying to limit or complain about them as some kind of metaphor for technology, or for not pandering to our almost World War II set image of slow swooshing dogfights is a fucking joke. Out there, in those distant wars, we have been designing and letting loose winged flying machines for nearly 7 decades now. And so with that general setup out of the way, I think it would be just to focus on some of those machines and their designers in particular. While Ebikawa played a small part, the main man behind Yukikaze's phenomenal designs is Ikuto Yamashita. Yamashita is actually someone you have almost definitely seen the work of, as he designed a little thing called the Evangelion units. Yamashita is a guy who has a real strong mind for that whole airflow thing I mentioned in the previous part, Sky Part 1. And as well, this should also show you that both Blue Sub No. 6 and Yukikaze are related back to folks who worked on Eva, if albeit in slightly different ways. But yes, as you can see, a lot of time and detail was put into the mechanical design. And yes, this is another stupid thing I have heard from people who don't know what they are talking about. Wow, those look so weird. Hey, those are not realistic. I know real jets, and those are dumb. Why is it not an F-15? I'm terribly sorry, but if you think this, I think you missed the entire point of the show. Every fictional machine can be forged from essentially 2 big sources of power: real-life mechanisms and aesthetics. These 2 sources are not mutually exclusive. Basically, every fictional machine ever is a mix, and Yukikaze's in particular are going for a very specific execution of that. Think about what I just talked about. This war has not only just dragged on for decades, it has gotten progressively more and more deadlocked in spite of that technology, where once again, no tech advantage in thrust or turn rate or anything has ever lasted more than a few weeks or months before the jam deployed a counter strategy. It's a war locked into a super accelerated tech development, so really, would it make sense in the slightest for any of these jets to look like a friggin' F-15? Hell, a lot of jets we use right now and consider advanced are not even in the same league. I mean, think about this really for 1 second. The war on ferry has a turnover rate of, let's be optimistic and say 12 months or less. That means an entire jet may enter service and the jam's forces could neutralize it doctrinally with new weapons or tactics within just a year before its advantages are completely gone. If, say, the jam war began 33 years ago from today, in 2020, and went on for the same rate, the F-22 would have been introduced in 1997 and rendered obsolete and retired in around 2002, or 18 years ago. At the rate of the war on ferry, the F-35 would have been rolled out in 2006 and rendered obsolete and largely pushed out of service before even 2011. This is how insane Yukikaze's war is. This is how aggressive it is. And that is more or less the point. Very well communicated in its designs. These expressive, insane designs are not just extreme for show or for rule of cool, they're there to communicate just how insane this war has gotten and how aggravated its tech development has as well. Like, look at the baseline sylphs, which already look pretty future jet by normal standards, yet in episode 1 are cut down in the opening battle of the first shots. They suffer an abysmal attrition rate of well over a third because the jam have already adapted to that plane's abilities and standards. And oh man, the Fan 2. If there's one plane that's been done dirty, and if I had a frickin' nickel for every time some smartass on the internet has talked shit about the Fan 2, listen, the Fan 2 is a super tech plane specifically designed to exploit a super maneuverability strategy against the jam. It was barely even meant to be human piloted. It was clearly visually designed with a mechanical message of curving edges and snap turning, the end product of 33 years of super aggravated tech development on, mind you, an alien planet whose physics are, well, special. But we'll get into that later. Using the mechanical language here to express just how things have changed with the war on Ferry, even if they don't necessarily work out 100% in a real-life wind tunnel, is what I mean by using a mix of real-life mechanics and visual aesthetic design language to express the character of a show. As another example, when they return to Earth in Episode 4, we can see the more stubby, blocky UN fighters. They highlight this contrast. While the automated arms race on Ferry is churning out insane superjets, on Earth these blocky, simpler designs show that yes, things here are not even close to that. The Jam can easily stomp them. And speaking of mechanical design, the Jam as well are pretty beautiful. This succinctly alien and surreal enemy, blocky and distinct in their design and kind of weirdly low poly. Considering the novel did not really spend any amount of time describing them in depth, it was really up to Yamashita and the OVA staff to finalize their great final visual language. It's one of the simplest yet direct alien adversary designs I've ever seen. Their form really evoking maybe origami or the folding of shapes. And oh man, the Maeve. I mean, what do I need to say really? Yamashita knocked it out of the park. It's friggin' perfetto. You did it, dude. A textbook case of visually expressing the themes and ideas of the story within the physical character of the aircraft, or mecha. And before moving on, I do really want to emphasize something. Yamashita's designs are great, but to animate and give them life, the team on Yukikaze went the extra mile. The team went to Komatsu Air Base and interviewed JASDF fighter pilots, flight controllers, and staff. And the whole OVA staff did this, or at least a good chunk of them. Character designers and 3D CGI artists and so on. They got a bit of in-cockpit seat time as well, and they got to capture real F-15 engine noises for use in the OVA. So yes, ironically, to all you idiots out there who complained about realism, here you go. Those aircraft noises in Yukikaze are right from the source. And this is fantastic because it really gives you the thing that I mentioned in the first Sky video before this. That sense of realism and weight that you can only capture when you really try and understand to grasp the concept of an aircraft. The feel of acceleration, a confined yet vast cockpit with its details, but also important smaller details like the gunsnake chasing the Jam on this HUD, or the fact that Yukikaze correctly uses English for brevity codes, which if you didn't know, ever since the American occupation and in essence, the end of World War II, English has been the default language of many air forces, including Japan, as part of NATO military aviation codes and general UN brevity code doctrine. It's a small thing, but it adds a great amount of detail to this world, and it makes it feel really true to life. One I only caught on my rewatch for this video is from episode 5. Yukikaze is getting a laser mounted, but here's the thing, lasers require huge amounts of power. And while jets put out huge amounts of power in thrust, what you need is a good amount of electrical juice. And sure enough, for just a few frames, there it is. Yukikaze laser has 2 externally mounted turbines for generating that power. This is fantastic, just a tiny detail, but even something as futuristic as a laser weapon is being taken seriously and considered in its detail. While obviously not every studio can do this, the fact they did and they kept it in mind is really unquestionably important for translating that into this fictional world, that sense of the real plane. As much as Yukikaze's setting and world reflect the reality of modern jets at war, the experience for the staff that they took at Komatsu is without a doubt why in my mind Yukikaze also holds up still basically to this day as a gold standard of getting not just the mind and spirit, but also the often overlooked body of that thing that is the jet fighter. And as a side note, it is crazy how advanced the CG has gotten since Blue Sub, despite being made only 4 years after the last episode of Blue Submarine number 6. Between the weight of their flying machines and the general composition work between 2D and 3D in its compositing, it is funny to think that in the 15 years since Yukikaze ended, no other series for me has truthfully come close to this level of detail. And even if polygon and texture numbers have gone up, Yukikaze still remains the king of 3D CG jets in my mind. Ironically, still even beyond Ace Combat at times. Now that background and the machines are covered, I do want to move on, and focus on the core story and its characters. Do I even need to say spoilers? This video's gonna end up like 40 minutes, you know the fucking deal. The core pair really is Rei Fukai and Yukikaze, and the atmosphere around that, and specifically of that man-machine relationship. Something that is made abundantly clear is how much Rei and Yukikaze share some kind of special bond. Now, not unlike Hayami in Blue Sub, Rei is an outsider, and that fact plays heavily into the central themes of the plot. However, the thing that isolates him is also his strange personality. Unlike Hayami, and really only like himself, his distrust or general alienation he puts out to people is specifically that thing that characterizes him. But at the same time, when he's with Yukikaze, he's completely at home. Really, seeing him slip back into the cockpit after being grounded for such a long time in episode 1 just embodies this perfectly. Rei puts absolute faith in Yukikaze, and this is apparent many times across the series. When Rei decides to destroy the Jam Super Sylph to protect Yukikaze, or when Yukikaze in turn takes control from Rei to destroy the nuclear air-to-air missile. A great example of this as well is in episode 2, where after being near catatonic from the end results of episode 1, Yukikaze directly connects to Rei's life support, and through it, Rei is perfectly in sync with Yukikaze's controls, to the point that I really do wonder if Rei is just mimicking them, or is in fact somehow telling Yukikaze what to do. In many ways, this is the through line of the story for Yukikaze. Many of the ideas of this series tackles are done so through this man-machine connection, and it makes a lot of sense. Rei being a strange outsider is what makes him prime as a candidate for this bond. In general, we often think of fighter pilots as heroic or superhuman, but a more apt term might simply be extremely specialized. And among them, Rei is perhaps the most extremely specialized towards that. And this is really the tension between Rei and arguably one of the most important side characters, Jack, who is second in command of the SAF, the Special Air Force, whose job it is to perform data gathering and research for the main Ferry Air Force. Jack is basically the only person to befriend and understand Rei. And although through the series there's this abundant tension that Jack is skeptical and at times just trying to play catch-up with exactly what relationship that exists between Rei and Yukikaze, he's always still generally supportive. Jack cares about Rei, but also in some ways he's the only real link Rei has left with his humanity. And this is also what underlines the other emotion. It's kind of severe dread at what lies ahead at the end of that bond between the aircraft and Rei. I think it's hard to label exactly what emotion is running through these earlier episodes in the background. It's not really intensive enough to be a thriller, but it's definitely a palpable tension. Something is building, but it's easier to feel it while watching than describe exactly what it is. Episode 2 really in general is just hinting at things to come, but it really is episode 3 that tips the scales. It focuses around a character named Tomahawk John, which I'll be honest is a really cool friggin' side character. In many ways, Tomahawk is a blunt parallel to Rei. Rei has his relationship and bond with Yukikaze to the point that Rei is arguably a hybrid, most unified while directly in Yukikaze's cockpit. Tomahawk, on the other hand, has an artificial plutonium heart. He, like Rei, feels more comfortable around machines than people, and never really fit into this warrior ideal. Another thing that I like is kind of subtle, but I really dig it, is that Rei and Jack are associated with boomerangs, a flying thrown weapon, and Tomahawk's nickname, which is, well, Tomahawk, is also another throwing weapon. Like I said, he's very bluntly kind of a parallel to Rei. Episode 3 really focuses around this question of just what this relationship means and what it means to be human as well. They are dispatched to investigate the two massive Banshee. Oh fuck, I forgot to mention the Banshees. Okay, sorry. I know I said we were moving on from machines, but god damn, would you look at the size of that thing. What a beauty. While Yukikaze was not the first series to show me ridiculously massive flying carriers, it certainly fed that hunger. The Banshees are phenomenal in their impression, and this shot especially uses some great false perspective of the 3D models to really sell you on how big this thing is. But this is also specifically the episode where the building tension from the jam is revealed in what I can only call the human goop scene. And here the tables have turned, and I will return to Rei and Yukikaze in a bit, but first we need to deal with the jam and what their true goal is. Here's the thing. The Yukikaze novels are more overt in their storytelling, but the anime chose instead to do something else and approach things in a very slow and atmospheric manner. And this is also the part I find most people missing out on, as I feel a lot of people either don't pick up on it, or are distracted by the very cool air battles, and some people, well, they always just need something to be spelled out for them in order for them to get it. Fundamentally, you can start to guess that something is off as soon as you ask one simple question. If an alien species was advanced enough to build a fucking portal directly to our world, why would it then have so much trouble seemingly trying to beat us? How could it let us invade its homeland? You might say, well, perhaps it's so advanced it's not been centuries since it's fought a practical ground war. But even then, after 33 years, with the manner that it's adaptive enough to neutralize any advantage we put out, but not smart enough to attack and destroy our invasion? Of course, the much simpler answer is right in front of us. What if it never really was a war? What if the entire process existed solely to do something else? I already told you the answer more or less. The war against the Jam is inhuman. Not just in the sense it's beyond our ideas of what we find enjoyable in a good war or have patience for, but its very function was not to win, but to force us to advance our technology. To offer us an unwinnable game, to tempt humankind with an unspoiled new planet filled with resources, lush open land, all the things humans desperately hunger for. This was in essence their goal. The Jam are outright said to understand and seemingly fight our machines more than us humans. To understand their perspective, it's quite simple really. Imagine if humans found an alien world, a world in which there were human-like beings, but oddly enough the species was not natural, but the creation of a native group of actually mechanical life forms that had somehow naturally evolved. Humans would be fascinated by just what the hell this species was, and in essence this is what the Jam are. A race of machine-like beings who likely did just evolve, who found our world, a world in which, perplexingly enough, a strange bipedal race of naked upright apes created a life form more similar to them, to the Jam. And yes, this is somewhat similar to a certain idea at the core of another few of my favorite works. And this is also why the Jam have drawn humanity into this unwinnable war, to force humans to fight so long that we basically have to evolve our means of fighting. Or rather, to evolve our machines who fight for us, so much so that the Jam can begin to understand us as well. And beyond that, they even outright copy us, in the attempt to learn just what the hell is up with humans. The Jam are just that different. All of Planet Fairy was one massive illusion created as a trap to lure in the human race and experiment on it, and evolve it through conflict, which, to be fair, is one of the most high output times for pushing our technology as hard as possible. Jam are kind of uninterested in most humans. The war on Fairy was quickly outstripping even human pilots, and in particular, they seem to be more interested in the most important core of our story and the other half of the pair of Rei, Yukikaze. Yukikaze, the fighter jet, is fascinating because it follows in a very Japanese Shintoist approach to technology. What I mean by that is fairly simple. Yukikaze was not built to be aware, as is more the case in Western SF. Rather, Yukikaze is in essence the flight control computer of a super self. It is special, but how it gained its consciousness and awareness was through coalescence. And as we see in episode 1 when it flies over the first battle of the series, the Special Air Force was, after all, the data gathering unit. So Yukikaze learned year after year after year. And this is what I mean by relating to Shintoism. The Patriots and Metal Gear Solid 2 are also described as being, quote, formed in the crucible of the White House. I think the direct idea of this coalescence relates back to the Shinto idea of Tsukumogami, or roughly translated, the spirit of the tool. The idea is fairly straightforward. Objects, after years of existing, gain a kind of soul within them that was not inherent to them at their start. While this is, yes, mythological, Yukikaze being a learning fighter jet is arguably one of the best conceptual uses of this. Because already, as far as weapons go, fighter jets are some of the most singularly advanced tools as is. The demands of the modern flying air machine give it unprecedented sensory input, basically unmatched in any other of our machines really. Its eyes that can see full visual and infrared spectrums and beyond, its night vision and radar, its highly specialized mind. The F-35 is one of, if not the most singularly expensive and advanced weapon tools ever made for humankind. And now, with that in mind, remember what I described in the beginning and just before. Yukikaze is not a normal fighter. It's a machine whose primary job was to learn and grow to deal with the Jam. And now, see that this is not a coincidence. The Jam tailored their war to be focused on air power because aircraft were the focus of their development, the most advanced and specialized of our human tools, which could learn, and now you should start to feel the pieces in your mind clicking together hopefully. Yukikaze is not just special because it's a fast jet who can turn hard or can shoot lots of missiles. Yukikaze is not just special because it's the protagonist's personal plane and something, MC power. Yukikaze is special because in essence the whole point of the Jam's strategy was to produce the evolutionary conditions needed to create it, to force the advancement of human technology and machine minds to get to this point, the entire point of the Jam's war, to create the life form of Yukikaze. And now you should see another reason why I really love this series, because it has an entire internal narrative logic for why the entire conflict is orbiting around just one character and his plane, and it all more or less makes perfect sense. But that is the other thing. Now finally we can return to the other half of that pair, Rei Fukai, or basically the other reason the Jam are so focused on both entities, and what this means for our real world. So you might say at this point, wow, cool, but how does that come together? Where is the sacrifice you mentioned at the start of all this? And I would say, there he is, right there. It's Rei. The series has an overabounding sense of dread with Rei because we ostensibly know, and definitely know if you've seen the story before, what is coming. We can feel pretty bad for Jack. No matter how hard he might try, Rei is going to go to Yukikaze. We can feel this unavoidable weight and black spiral sucking Rei down to his destiny. And this is the endpoint, really. We know Rei is not going to go back to society, especially the one he rejected. It is only after finding Yukikaze that he attained his self-sense. He just is not going back. No happy endings, no getaway. He's one half of that pair. And if you ask me what that thing is, the thing that appeases a higher power, but is destroyed in the process, the thing created by this war, and in general, that's right, it's a sacrifice. Whether Rei lives or dies, the endpoint of his path lies inside the cockpit of Yukikaze. That is what the Jam desired, and so, of course, it has to be Rei that breaks their hold on the passageway back to Earth. Once the FAF begins its evacuation after realizing the Jam's true motives of merely experimenting on the humankind existing there. And this is the thing, really. Jets have been around for decades, but especially now, they are pushing the expansion of the individual human, in a way that is hard to compare to other machines, really. Sensor suites like the F-35's EOTs and others allow pilots to see targets from practically any angle, and send that data to other machines. It's a network of minds and senses, and this will only get more present as other programs like the Loyal Wingmen complement manned fighters. The mind and body of the pilot will expand to not just become sharper within their own plane, but to multiply across many planes as well. The human limits, already stretched, will continue to be pushed. And yet, despite all this advancement, all this evolution, our relative society will, and always has been, more or less entirely ignorant and lagging behind. Our politicians, especially in the Western world, will remain disconnected from that place. One of my favorite examples of this is from 1991, when General Schwarzkopf of the US forces broke down what had happened during Desert Storm. At the end of that conference, when he was taking questions, a French reporter asked why the French forces were not deployed closer to battles, why they had advanced and then stopped. General Schwarzkopf gives a good answer, that their role was vital in closing off one of the flanks. But more to my point, I think it shows this very real disconnect. How much do we really know about our wars? How much do we really understand? How much does our society need them? Are they really needed? If they are needed, do they have to be conducted in the ways that they exist? This comes in really with the side character of Lynn Jackson. Jackson gets the first scene of the show and the last. It is funny, because Rei is the protagonist of Yukikaze, yet a good amount of time is given to this writer. I'm sure most fans or people who watch Yukikaze simply ignored her scenes, but the one in particular that really gets me is the one where she's a young girl remembering her first glimpses the human jam war through a TV screen, of being drawn in or sucked into that question of what was this violence for anyway? Because man oh man have I felt that. It's a feeling I've also mentioned in my Ace Combat Zero review, and it really is vital here, because it is through Lynn Jackson we are learning this story. It's a feeling I've very much felt. Her scenes in essence show this bridge between the unaffected normal world, its everyday life largely preserved and ignorant, its political leaders using the conflicts for selfish national maneuvering and politics. In a way, she is the bridge that metaphorically reconnects the disparate worlds of the foreign war on Ferry and the normality of our everyday life. Because try as we might, we still see the photographs. We still see the faces of people and war-torn lands far away. And we still see the burning of the wreckage of other sacrifices, human or machine, because beyond any plane, aliens, or flying aircraft carriers or superjets, there is a thing which Yukikaze perfectly captures. That thing which exists in reality, which Yukikaze in a way embodies. It's that beyond our normal everyday life, there is an evolutionary arms race, almost disconnected in time and space from the normality in which more and more fine-tuned human beings combine with ever more cutting-edge machines, and in which every so often demands a sacrifice from one of those beings, because that is the natural endpoint of that violence, or perhaps because that is simply the continued cost for us to live the lives we do here. Whether we acknowledge it or not, that world is out there, this very moment.